Hey, welcome to Fundamentals. I'm Pastor Matt here with Pastor Casey and John Davis. And today our episode is brought to you by Stop and Shop Seltzer Water, the best seltzer water at the best price. I'm just kidding. They didn't sponsor us, but it is delicious.
You get like a pack for like $1. So.
If you want to, we will accept sponsorship for one case of seltzer water. We're not a high-priced podcast right now.
So much. I was gonna say we should have at least asked for two.
Yeah, you know what? We should probably just dig into what we know well, which is the Catechism. And actually, today, really interesting. We start out with that because we're talking about the Seventh Commandment. You are not to steal. John, what is the answer that Luther gives under kind of that broader description of you are not to steal?
Yeah, so just like with all the other commandments we kind of talked about, Luther gives a really awesome explanation of how we should keep the commandment by the things that we shouldn't do, but also telling us the things that we should do. So what Luther says is we should fear and love God so that we do not take our neighbor's money or possessions or get them in any dishonest way, but help him to improve and protect his possessions and income.
Yeah, and I think, what's so interesting to me about this commandment is actually, so Luther, when he wrote the small catechism, we've talked about this before, he also wrote like an expanded version called the large catechism. So if you can't remember that, just think small, large. But in the large catechism, he was writing that to train parents and pastors how to kind of disciple their kids, and especially like the clergy. And something I like that he said in here was this. He says, when he talks about this commandment, he says, "For to steal is nothing else than to acquire someone else's property by unjust means. These are few words, include taking advantage of our neighbor in any sort of dealings that result in loss to them. Stealing is a widespread, common vice, but people pay so little attention to it that the matter is entirely out of hand. As a result, if we were to hang every thief," and I love how this image he gives, "as a result, if we were to hang every thief on the gallows, especially those who do not admit it, the world would soon be empty and there would be a shortage of both hangmen and gallows. For, as I just said, stealing is not just robbing someone's safe or pocketbook, but also taking advantage of someone in the market, in all stores, butcher shops, wine and beer cellars, workshops, and in short, wherever business is transacted and money is exchanged for goods or services." I think that's just such a powerful kind of thing, because I think on the surface with any of these commandments, we very easily kind of look and say, well, no stealing. I don't steal. But then you start kind of digging down to that and you realize it's a lot more than just, did I steal $5 out of somebody's wallet, or did I take something from the store that doesn't belong to me? It actually goes into, how am I transacting business? How am I conducting myself at work? Am I doing that in an honorable way that earns the money I'm receiving? Or am I kind of, shortchanging my employer here or there?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to bring up, because we live in a day and age where more of our commodities are not as physical or tangible, but are sometimes digital, sometimes in the cloud. And I think there are a whole bunch of implications that come from this commandment that need to be talked about in our day and age, especially as life continues to move and change at such a rapid pace. I think really a cool door has opened up for us to talk about this commandment in a new light for our own time and place today.
It even digs into what I think is so interesting is it even digs into social justice issues. So think about it this way. Oftentimes we say, oh, well, I don't steal in any way whatsoever. I don't take advantage of people in any way whatsoever. But, we have to realize that we exist in a larger economic system. And so when you buy a set of clothes, did you trace that back to the source? Do you know where the workers that put those clothes together paid fairly for what they were doing? When you grab a cup of coffee, your favorite coffee place, was the person that grew and sourced that coffee, were they doing that in a responsible and socially just kind of way? Or were people taken advantage of so that somebody could create a bigger profit margin? And then you on the other end are a part of that bigger system. So, it's really interesting when you really start digging down. I think Luther's words are more true today than they've ever been before, which is the reality is, we all fall short in this commandment one way or another.
Yeah. And I think like I said earlier, like we're given two different things. We're given what we shouldn't do and then what we should do. And I think you've kind of both hinted at that, and the idea that, hey, this goes far beyond just not taking advantage of people or stealing or doing these things. But if you have an opportunity to help people and you don't take that opportunity, then that's also what we're talking about in this commandment. If you see someone that is in need and you don't reach out to give them that helping hand, like that's what we're talking about in this as well. Because the Catechism says this is the central thought of this commandment, that God created us. And I love how it kind of uses this image of, this is why we were created. God created us to look after the earthly gifts that he has given our neighbors for their life and their well-being, that we were created not just to not take from other people, but we were created to help people keep those things that they have and to give things to people that don't have. And this is the purpose that we're created for, to take care of God's creation being other people around us as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool picture because, what it really starts to boil down to is the deeper question that all these commandments are really hanging on, which is, how do we love God and how do we love our neighbor? How do we exist in community in such a way where we exist for the people around us, to love them, to serve them? God's given us a creation, and a part of that creation, he always gave us the mandate to care for that creation. And I like the way that you put it, are we caring for our neighbors' things around us? Are we seeing them as valuable and important? I was thinking one time I was sitting on the front porch with Liza, and we were, we live on kind of a busy street. Sometimes people drive by at a normal speed. Sometimes it looks a little bit like a freeway. Some people, it is New Jersey. A lot of people live on a street like that. But what's really interesting is we're just kind of sitting, having a relaxing afternoon. I'm, sitting on the front porch. So I'm not necessarily like wearing shoes. I think I'm sitting in my socks. And all of a sudden I look across the street and I see this little 2-year-old coming out of the driveway of my neighbor's house and like, kind of making it toward this busy street. And my only thought was, whoa, I got to do something. So I'm like up, like sprinting after this kid, picking him up. I'm in my socks, like never met this kid before, taking him to the back door. I'm sure his dad was a little freaked out when he says, hey, who's this random guy, holding my kid and like taking him to the house. But, he was so appreciative that I was looking after his kid, flip that. That also happened to us. Our 2-year-old got out and somebody literally stopped their car to bring him back, and it's one of those things that can happen to anybody. But, think if it was flipped, think if I'm just sitting there going, oh, sorry, it's my afternoon to relax. And if I'd wear shoes, I'd be happy to go after. And hey, you should watch your kid better, and didn't go after him. That sends a strong picture. And so I think what we need to realize is these commandments have a way of sending a strong picture to the world around us. When we're seeking to live a life that is trying to honor our neighbor's possessions as if they were our own, giving that same care, then we send a strong message to the world that, hey, there's something different within us.
Yeah. A big word that comes out for me as we consider this commandment is security. Where does your security come from? And I think very often we have this sense, especially in North America, that our security comes from our stuff. The stuff that makes us secure are things like a house or a well-invested retirement fund or a nice car, or look to any number of things or commodities to help us feel like, yeah, we're in control of our lives. Things are going well. But what this commandment challenges us to do is to see that true security doesn't come from any one particular thing, but that security rather comes from God. And when you realize that you're secure in him, suddenly now you are free to be generous and I suppose you could even say liberal with your stuff. To build up the security of others, and also to seek the welfare and security of others, because you're not concerned about it for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. It kind of goes down to, these commandments are an opportunity for us not just to know what we should or shouldn't do, but as you're saying, Casey, to be able to say, how can I be a tangible reflection of the love of Jesus in the world around me? Like, you think about our workplaces, people might not like necessarily want to become a Christian, or maybe they're an atheist, but they should want to have Christians working for them. We should be living out these commandments at such a level and trying to be such a tangible reflection of Jesus that, when it comes to a commandment like this, it's so embedded in who we are that people are like, well, I don't know how I feel about God, but I certainly know I want that guy working for me because he's a Christian. And those guys have a tendency to just live at a higher level, not in kind of an arrogant way, but more of with this humility that says, I'm going to care for you as much as Christ has cared for me.
And I think looking to the picture of Jesus in light of this commandment is something really powerful as well, to realize that Jesus, in a certain sense, had more taken from him than anybody else, right? He had his life taken away. He had his dignity taken away on the cross. He was the one who, I suppose you could say, had been stolen from in the worst possible way. But yet, even in the moment of his own death, what does Jesus do? He just lets it happen. He's giving everything he's got for the security and welfare of the world. And when you realize that he's the same God who continues to give to you, supply you with all the things that you need, and continues to take care of you, it completely transforms your perspective on your stuff, on other people's stuff, and other people themselves.
Yeah. So I guess a question that I'll try to answer it too after you guys, but I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. But so how do you see like the seventh commandment working in your own life? Like whether it be, where do you fall short with the seventh commandment? Like how does this make sense for your life? And where do you find yourself having opportunities to work on that second part of the commandment of helping to improve your neighbor's life and possessions and things? What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I think I have issues with the commandment. I think where I still embody kind of an individualistic posture toward the world, where I think, no, like my stuff is my stuff and your stuff is your stuff. Let me take care of mine. You take care of yours. Kind of like in college, I was the guy who's going to label all of my stuff when it goes into the apartment fridge so that nobody else touches it. And similarly, I'm not going to touch anybody else's stuff. You just let me be, and you do you. I think that's kind of a paradigm for me sometimes, how I look at the world. And if I see somebody else who's maybe struggling, I just think to myself, well, that's your own fault. And I tend to make this hard division between myself and other people. And I think this commandment is a real challenge to me to see that positive aspect of the commandment, that no, I'm called as someone who follows Jesus to be invested in others and their own well-being. So I think this is a challenge to me to be more generous.
Yeah, I think for me, the real challenge in this commandment is that it's not about how much somebody has or does not have, as far as whether I should respect their stuff. When I was a freshman, I graduated high school in 2000, so I'm dating myself right there. And so my fall, I'm not that old. Wow, I know. Oh, 19, John, 19. Yeah. So, when I went to college for the first time, like broadband internet was a big thing. And we were on a college campus. So they had the best of the best kind of, high speed internet, right? And so that's also the same time Napster came out. And so music streaming wasn't really a thing. People still bought, music on CDs and stuff. But all of a sudden you get any song you wanted, for free on Napster, downloaded through this like massive file sharing thing. And I remember we had no problem, queuing up thousands of songs in Napster and letting them just stream overnight while we're sleeping, pulling it in. We had no care for who created the content, who deserved to be paid for that content. The fact that we were enjoying this stuff for free. And I remember we used to think, Metallica was a band that was like really big in that kind of movement of saying, hey, this is wrong. It's got to be shut down. You got to control this kind of thing. And I remember we just would think, oh man, they've got so much money and they're doing so well. Why why should they care? We should be able to take a couple songs from them. And what we were doing was wrong in the sense of we were saying, well, they have so much. What's wrong with me taking a little bit? Instead of realizing that this commandment has nothing to do with how much money somebody has or how big the corporation may be and would they notice or wouldn't they, but rather it comes down to am I honoring God in my actions and not how much somebody does or doesn't have.
Yeah I think that's awesome. And when I think of the seventh commandment in context of the rest of the Bible, I think the main story that comes to my mind is of a certain wee little man named Zacchaeus. You like that? And I just think it's a great story because you see both sides of the commandment, and you see how Jesus interacts with people that fall short in this. Because like we said, we all mess up at this commandment, right? Just like we mess up with all the commandments. But the real question that we struggle with is, okay, so I've broken this commandment. Like, what now? Like, how does what happens now, right? So in this story, we see a guy who was a tax collector who was doing his job, but on top of collecting people's taxes, he was taking a little extra for himself, and people didn't really like that. And he was getting a little rich off of it. And Jesus kind of calls him on his stuff, right? But instead of condemning him, he hangs out with him, goes to his house, has this awesome interaction with him, changes his heart. And you see Zacchaeus do that second part of the commandment. He realizes, hey, I have taken from people, but now I have this opportunity to give back even more and care for those people around me because I've fallen short, but through Jesus, I have this opportunity to do even more than I ever had a chance to do before. Yeah.
And I love that story because it's just a reminder to us that, it's not about what you have or haven't done. It's about the love of Christ filling you first. And then because of the love of Christ, you have very tangible ways you can express that. And for Zacchaeus, it was, hey, I want to, not only do I want to not violate the seventh commandment anymore, but I want to make right what I've made wrong.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful thing. Well, I think this is great. Realize that a lot of people learn these as kids, but these aren't just commandments for kids. They're commandments for us all. And in fact, that's why we love fundamentals, is we get to dig in a little bit deeper to these core things of the faith that are so important. So what I would tell you is if you're enjoying fundamentals, you can subscribe on the Bethlehem Church Live YouTube page. You can download the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app and you can get updates as when each new episode comes out, as well as links to any kind of important stuff if we link or reference something in the comments. But then also, if you have a favorite podcast platform, whether it's iTunes, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, any of those, you can also find fundamentals on there. And wherever it is you go to find fundamentals, take an opportunity to rate it, leave a comment, share it with somebody else. Because we give all this content away for free. So you're not stealing it if you're watching it or sharing it, but rather we want to be able to just kind of share the great things that God's given with those around us. So hope you enjoyed this episode. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Fundamentals.